blank, underscore, blank. There are schools that look like dreams, towering iron gates, marble hallways, and gleaming medals displayed as testaments of glory. But behind those honor boards and inspiring speeches lies a chilling silence when injustice unfolds. Naomi and Nia Carter, twin black sisters, stepped into Crestfall Media with flawless resumes and hearts full of ambition. What they didn't know was, this place wasn't waiting to greet them with opportunity, but with glances shaped by prejudice, older than the stone beneath their feet. From whispered mockeries, to anonymous notes left on their desks, to the day hatred came knocking right at their front door. This story isn't just about a fight to reclaim dignity. It's about how two women calmly climbed through layers of injustice, turned pain into power, and made an entire system bow its head in reckoning. Stop sign if you've ever believed that silence is the only way to survive. Stay with this story until the very end, because sometimes, the shift of an entire world starts with just one sentence. No more. Blank. Underscore. Blank. The glass revolving door slowly closed behind them, cutting off the noise of traffic outside, leaving behind a luxurious and chilling silence within the Crestfall Media building. Naomi Carter stood still in the reception hall, her eyes quietly scanning the space. Gleaming walnut walls, crystal chandeliers casting warm golden light onto the marble floors. Everything was tidy, hushed, and perfectly distant. Nia, her twin sister, stepped beside her, dressed identically. Navy suits, white shirts, sleek black briefcases, not a crease out of place, not a step out of sync. At first glance, they looked like two perfect replicas of professionalism. But beneath that confident shell, both hearts beat fast and heavy. Not out of fear, but because they knew exactly where they were stepping into. And more importantly, they knew exactly who they were in the eyes of the people here. It wasn't mere curiosity in the glances from the front desk, the elevator, and the hallways that turned toward them. It was judgment, categorization, caution, wrapped in the polite skin of the corporate world. At Crestfall, where 96% of the staff were white and hailed from prestigious universities, two black girls from Georgia, no matter how impressive their resumes, were still other. No one said it out loud, but Naomi could read it in the glance that lingered 2 seconds too long. In the lightly pressed lips of the blonde receptionist. In this way, a chatting manager suddenly fell silent as they passed, and even in the voice of the automated system that rang out. Welcome to Crestfall Media, we lead through difference. A slogan that felt painfully ironic at this moment. The elevator opened to the creative division, where they had been assigned to the marketing team. It was an open space with high ceilings and glass-walled meeting rooms. Each workstation was like a miniature stage where everyone performed their roles with carefully curated smiles. This is it, Naomi whispered to her sister, her lips tightening. They walked toward the assigned corner, two desks side by side, facing the window overlooking Madison Avenue. The chairs were still new, the monitors untouched, and on the desks, two pristine nameplates. No logos, no color. A young onboarding employee approached with a forced smile. Welcome to the team, everything's all set for you. Her eyes quickly darted away, as if unsure what else to say. Then she disappeared into the crowd. Naomi looked at Nia. No words were needed. They both knew. They weren't welcomed, only permitted. But they sat down. They opened their laptops. They straightened their posture. Because they hadn't come here to be welcomed. They came here to unlock a door that had remained sealed for people like them for far too long. And in that very moment, as Naomi typed in her first password and Nia began reading the company orientation documents, neither of them knew that in just a few weeks, this very place, this smooth wooden floor they sat upon, would witness a seismic shift unlike anything before. They didn't know, but they were ready. Blank. Underscore. Blank. Day 2 at Crestfall began with the ping of an internal email chain, a sudden team meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. The subject line was vague. Simply, realigning campaign narrative tone. Naomi and Nia stepped into the glass-walled meeting room. 13 people were already seated. Nearly all of them looked up as they entered. A few indifferent nods, a few smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. And then there was the gaze of Bryce Langston, dubbed the creative face of the company. A well-known team leader, slicked back hair, exuding the air of someone intimately familiar with invisible power. "Oh, our new duo," he said, drawing out his words like he was welcoming two new show animals into the office. "Hope you won't feel too out of place with your urban flair." Silence. A few soft chuckles followed, not from humor, but from complicity. Nia kept her facial expressionless. Naomi tilted her head slightly, her gaze cold and still like a mirror-surfaced sea. The meeting went on, with Bryce rattling off about the need for brand consistency, when Naomi offered a creative perspective rooted in the psychological behavior of African American consumers. Instead of addressing the professional insight, Bryce laughed. "Well, that's a very bold approach. But around here, we base our work on real data, not identity-driven emotions." The room went quiet. Nia leaned forward slightly, about to speak, but Naomi placed a hand gently over hers. Calm, composed, she turned to Bryce, lips curled into a faint, controlled smile. "You're right, data matters. That's why I've included a breakdown of consumer response by ethnicity in the file below. It'd be a shame to overlook numbers, just because of bias." Bryce paused for a second. Just a second, then gave a curt nod. "Looks like you know how to defend yourself." The meeting ended in an atmosphere that was half heavy, half performative, as the team dispersed and Naomi and Nia stepped into the hallway. They passed two co-workers whispering. "A little too outspoken, don't you think? Still wondering how they got in, diversity quota." They whispered, but not quietly. They wanted the sisters to hear. Because those were knife blades in words. No blood, but still sharp enough. Inside the elevator, back to their desks, Naomi spoke, her eyes fixed on the floor numbers. "They don't want us to fail. They want us to lose control." Nia closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "And that's something they'll never get. At Crestfall, no one had to shout to inflict harm. Here, wounds were made in soft tones, and judgment was wrapped in polite sarcasm." But even in that world, two women still chose to stand tall, to speak with unwavering voices, and to let the fire in their eyes burn, in a place where no one else dared to look directly. Blank. Blank. There are things that never make it into HR reports. Not caught on security cameras. Not documented in any internal audit file. Because they happen in a glance, between interrupted sentences, or simply, in the absence of the voice that should have spoken up. Week 3 at Crestfall Media. Naomi walked into the workspace holding the campaign proposal she and Nia had worked on all weekend. They knew, this campaign wasn't just a marketing plan. It was a chance to prove that they were more than just diversity hires. As some whispered, but the moment they entered the meeting room, Bryce's gaze said everything before a word was spoken. Cold, judging, and reeking of challenge. "You've got 2 minutes. Make it count," he said, without offering a seat. Naomi remained standing. Her voice was clear, concise, and straight to the point. The room stayed silent, not from admiration, but from discomfort. When she reached the part about engaging the black consumer demographic, a colleague, Claire, who had usually been polite, abruptly cut in. "But is that really a worthwhile segment to invest in? I haven't seen data showing brand loyalty from that group." Naomi gently rotated her presentation toward Claire. "There is, page 12, a Nielsen study, and real-world feedback from Target and Procter & Gamble campaigns. Feel free to verify." Claire flushed, then smirked. "Oh, right, I hadn't gotten that far." Bryce interjected, voice coated in amusement. "You know, Naomi, sometimes passion can be mistaken for aggression. Here, we prioritize harmony." The entire room, a dozen or more, said nothing. No one said, "That was inappropriate." No one said, "Let her finish." No one looked at Naomi like a colleague being treated unfairly. They just looked down at their laptops, typed a few words, clicked their pens, nodded faintly. They chose silence. And in that silence, they chose a side. That afternoon, Nia sent an email to our. No complaints, no accusations, just a quiet request for a private conversation to address concerns about the work environment. The reply came 4 days later. Cold, bureaucratic, stripped of humanity. "We acknowledge your feedback, No policy violations identified. Thank you for your attention to the Crestfall work environment. No follow-up, no investigation. Because discrimination without concrete evidence means no problem at all. The following week, Naomi was quietly removed from the main project. No announcement. Her replacement? Lucas, a less experienced colleague who had asked her how to draft a report just the week before. When Naomi inquired why, the team manager, Janet, replied in a tone that sounded straight from an HR manual. We feel you need a bit more time to adjust before taking on a lead role. This decision is meant to support your growth. Naomi didn't respond. She didn't have to. Because in Janet's eyes, and in the system behind her, Naomi was never meant to belong. That night, the sisters sat in their small apartment. The city outside still lit up, traffic still moved, and TV ads still aired promises of diversity, inclusion, creativity. But inside them, the feeling of being suffocated spread like invisible smoke. We did everything right, Nia whispered. But right is never enough. Naomi replied, because they never intended to give us a real chance. Crestfall didn't fire them, didn't insult them outright. They just did enough. Enough to push them toward the margins. Enough so that no one had to take responsibility. And that's how systems maintain power. Not by shouting, not by beating, but by turning away, until the voices of those who dare to be different are silenced without a sound. Blank. Blank. When Naomi and Nia returned to their small East Manhattan apartment over the weekend, a light rain was falling. Raindrops tapped against the windowpane like the knocks of memory, slow, steady, and impossible to ignore. There were no loud voices in the room. There was no need. Each of them understood what the other's silence carried. Not fatigue from work, but exhaustion from having to survive in a place that gave them no room to breathe. On the kitchen table, 3 cups of hot tea. They were prepared by Mr. Samuel Carter, their father, who had arrived earlier. Unannounced, just as he always did when he sensed something was wrong. A former military man who once served as a security advisor for a top law firm. Samuel wasn't one to be easily rattled by conflict. But he had a kind of intuition, an invisible weapon only possessed by those who had survived 100 impossible situations. Naomi sat down first. Nia followed. No one needed to say a word. Samuel simply pushed the 2 cups toward his daughters. Then he began. I can see the way you're sitting. I can see the way your eyes avoid each other. I don't need to ask, I know what's happening. Naomi opened her mouth, but her voice wasn't as sharp as it was at the office. It trembled slightly, like a bowstring pulled too tight for too long. They think we're too confident, too clear, and that's the problem. Samuel nodded. Because confidence from a black person is never seen as natural. It's seen as a threat. He took a sip of tea, then set the cup down. And that's why you need to learn this. True strength doesn't lie in the ability to yell. It lies in the ability to hold your gaze steady when the whole room turns its back. Nia bowed her head, her eyes shimmered with tears. But does silence change anything? She asked. Samuel leaned forward, his gaze sharp as a blade, but his voice calm as a drifting breeze. Silence can be a prison. But silence can also be a weapon, if you know how to use it. What they fear isn't your voice raised in protest. It's your refusal to retreat, even without raising it at all. Then he stood up and walked to the corner of the room, where 2 framed photos hung. One of them was in uniform, his eyes cold as stone. The other of the twins in black martial arts uniforms, sweat on their brows, hands clasped tightly after an intense session. I didn't teach you martial arts to fight back. I taught you so that when the moment comes, you never lower your head. The strongest strike in any battle is patience at the right moment, and action within the right limits. Naomi suddenly remembered. She was 16 when a white student had knocked her books to the ground and said, "You should know your place." She stood tall, didn't pick up the books, didn't cry, just stared at him, and walked away, leaving behind someone unraveling because he couldn't shake her. Keep the fire in your eyes. Keep peace in your hands. And when they cross the line, let them know they picked the wrong one. That night, the room no longer felt as cold as it had that afternoon. Naomi and Nia couldn't shake off all the exhaustion. But within them, a different kind of strength began to speak. Not the kind of rage that explodes, but a clarity, sharp as steel, forged in silence. Crestfall Media didn't know they had just hired 2 new employees. They had just walked into a battle, one they had no idea how to fight. Because they didn't understand who they were truly up against. Blank. Underscore. Blank. Monday morning. As always, the Crestfall office gleamed with an almost artificial silence. Everything was designed to look perfect, from the vases in the hallway corners to the walls lined with prestigious awards. But the moment Naomi and Nia stepped into the workspace, something unfamiliar crept into the air. Both of them froze as soon as they saw their desks. On the computer screens, someone had changed the wallpaper to a racist photo collage. It was a meme. Naomi's face photoshopped onto the body of a black maid scrubbing the floor. With Comic Sans text that read, "Let's keep Crestfall clean." On the desk, sticky notes were scattered everywhere. Diversity Hire of the Month. Smile more, or go back. Quota Queen. Under Nia's office chair sat an overripe banana, placed with obvious, ugly intent. Naomi stood still for a few seconds. Not out of shock, but to suppress the fire rising in her chest. Nia said nothing. She only gripped her bag strap tighter, knuckles pale. Around them, coworkers glanced, then quickly looked away. No one laughed, but no one spoke. One person raised their phone, recording secretly. Another quietly shut the door to their office. Bryce appeared minutes later, walking in as if nothing had happened. He glanced casually at the sisters' desks, then smirked. Well, someone's feeling creative today. But in media, you have to learn to handle media pressure. Naomi stared directly into his eyes. Nia whispered, "You know who did this?" Bryce shrugged, pulling out his phone and pretending to check his schedule. "I manage campaigns, not feelings." They filed a complaint that very day. HR received the form, printed it, clipped it into a folder, and nodded with the usual, empathetic, smile. "We'll review and get back within 72 business hours." And then, nothing happened. The next day, the printer on their floor was accidentally reset. Every time Naomi or Nia printed a document, an extra page came out, filled with racist mockery. No one took responsibility. No investigation followed. Naomi's campaign materials for a major pitch suddenly disappeared from the internal network. She was blamed for showing up empty-handed. Nia, one day, discovered one of her emails had been randomly forwarded to the entire department, a message in which she mentioned the tense and disrespectful atmosphere among coworkers. In the hallway, whispers turned into chuckles. In the elevator, eyes avoided theirs. And in meetings, their voices weren't challenged, just ignored. Like silence was a wall they were slowly being pushed behind. That night, Nia sat by the window. She didn't cry, but her eyes were hollow. Naomi poured a glass of water, then sat beside her. "They don't want to fire us. They want us to walk away, so they don't have to take the blame." Nia exhaled slowly. "They don't know, we're not the type to walk away." Somewhere inside them, what their father had once taught was rising again, not as theory, but as an invisible armor. The silence from the apathy of the system. The cruelty was wrapped in polite words. All of it was painting a clear picture. Crestfall didn't just have a problem with 2 black women. Crestfall had a problem with the truth itself. And that truth, sooner or later, would find its voice. Blank. Underscore. Blank. Friday morning. A drizzle fell from the sky, not heavy, but just enough for people to pull their collars up as they entered the Crestfall Media headquarters. Naomi and Nia had arrived earlier than usual. They hadn't said much during the subway ride, but both could feel the same thing in the air. Today would be different. As they walked into the office, the scene at their desks made them stop in their tracks. Not out of surprise, not out of shock, just the clear confirmation that the limit had been reached. Their filing cabinet was flung open. Their records were pulled out. A printed copy of the complaint they had submitted to HR had been torn in half and pinned to the whiteboard behind their chairs. With a handwritten note, "Talking trash about coworkers is the new diversity skill?" Next to it, once again, a banana. But this time, it had been smashed and smeared across the keyboard. Soft sneakers hissed behind their backs. Some people passed by with glances, then lowered their heads and walked faster. A few phones were raised, this time. Recording openly. Naomi took off her glasses. Set them gently on the desk. Nia pulled out her chair, not to sit, but to give herself room to stand. They said nothing for nearly 30 seconds. And then Naomi turned to her sister. Her voice was low and clear, like a bell cutting through heavy air. No more. Just 2 words. But they sliced through the fog like thunder. Nia nodded. No further discussion. No need for a plan. Because the decision had already been made over many sleepless nights. It had only been waiting for a moment to surface. That afternoon, the entire department was summoned for an emergency meeting. The subject line in the email read, "Culture Alignment Check-in." A meeting pretending to be neutral, but everyone knew it was about the incident that morning. Bryce stood at the front, hands in pockets, white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, the usual half smile on his face. "I think it's time we all reflect on our behavior in a professional setting," he began. Naomi raised her hand. The whole room turned. Her gaze was calm. Her voice was not loud, but firm enough to silence every smirk in the room. "If this is a conversation about workplace culture, let's begin with the truth. The truth is, my sister and I have faced discrimination for the past 2 months. Through words, through actions, and through the complicity of silence." No one interrupted. Naomi looked around the room. "We reported it. No one investigated. We were isolated. No one spoke up. And this morning, my desk was turned into a stage for a racist joke. And so today, we're done being silent." She stepped forward. Nia stood beside her. 2 women, facing not just a room, but an entire system trying to press them down. Naomi looked Bryce straight in the eye. "You weren't smart to think we didn't have proof." Nia pulled out a small hard drive, plugged it into her laptop. On the large screen behind them, a stream of files appeared. Slack messages with racial undertones. Phone-recorded videos from meetings filled with mockery. Intentionally forwarded emails. And most of all, a voice recording of Bryce saying, word for word, "Let's just wait for them to quit. No need to fire them. They won't last long anyway." The room went silent. Someone in the front row shifted in their seat. Bryce flushed red, but before he could respond, Nia's voice rang out. "You want to play mind games? We know these tactics. And now, the game's over." Naomi shut the screen off. Turned to the senior executive standing beside Bryce, someone who had remained silent until now. "We've submitted all this data to legal. And to outside media, if necessary." Her voice wasn't threatening. It was simply the truth. That room, and Crestfall Media itself, had no idea that this meeting would become a historic moment within the company. Because from that moment on, no one could pretend they didn't see. No one could blame a misunderstanding. No one could hide the truth for even one more day. Blank. Underscore. Blank. The following Monday, right after the meeting that exposed Bryce and his accomplices, the atmosphere at Crestfall Media shifted completely. Every glance now avoided the Carter sisters. There were no more whispers or mocking smiles, only a disturbed silence. The truth had been laid bare, but the system still refused to move. HR remained silent. Upper management asked them to keep things internal. That afternoon, Naomi and Nia exited the elevator on the first floor, heading for a private meeting with legal. But their feet had barely touched the lobby floor when the trap was already in place. Bryce was waiting. Next to him stood Derek and Cole, the same 2 men who had once littered their desks with racist images. They no longer looked evasive, no longer pretended to be civil. They were ready for a public confrontation. The main lobby, with its 7-meter glass walls and sunlight pouring down like a stage spotlight, suddenly became the center of attention. Employees from the upper floors looked down. Security approached, and then hesitated. Surveillance cameras captured the entire frame. The whole world seemed to hold its breath. Bryce stepped forward. "Well, look who we have here. Justice Queen and her little sister." Naomi didn't flinch. Nia glanced over, not with fear, but with cold calculation. Derek clapped slowly. "We just wanted to say congrats. Not everyone gets the spotlight by crying for help." Cole let out a loud laugh. "Heard you're both black belts? Let's see it then. Or are you only good at moral speeches?" Naomi took a deep breath. Her voice was steady and clear. We gave you the chance to stop. Now, everything you do is your own choice. Bryce smirked and shoved her shoulder with the back of his hand. Drop the moral act. You're here to learn submission. A second later, the world flipped. Naomi twisted her wrist, used the shove as a pivot, and stepped back, redirecting Bryce's momentum and sending him stumbling. Derek lunged forward, but Nia moved, swift and instinctive, intercepting with a diagonal foot sweep that dropped him flat on the marble floor. Head thudding against the stone, Cole charged from the right, but Naomi sidestepped, caught his wrist, locked it, twisted 180 degrees, and pinned him with a shoulder hold that made everyone around the nearby lounge seats leap to their feet. No blood, no screams, just the sound of bodies hitting tile and the ragged breathing of men who never thought their victims knew how to fight back. Bryce roared, clawing at the floor, trying to lift himself. Naomi stepped forward, knelt beside him. Her voice was low, cold as a blade to the throat. You thought this was a game. But I want you to remember this clearly. Every time you laughed at someone else's pain, you were creating the kind of person you should never have crossed. Around them, employees gathered. Some filmed, some stood and clapped. Not loud, not thunderous, but real. Senior managers rushed down. Security closed in. But as Naomi and Nia stepped back, releasing their aggressors, they didn't back down. They stepped forward. No one dared to touch them. No one dared to tell them to leave the lobby. Because the entire space had gone silent to hear them speak. Naomi looked straight into the surveillance camera. Nia tightened her coat. Then the two of them turned and walked toward the legal office, their stride cutting through a wall of fear that had stood for years. Behind them, Bryce lay sprawled, gasping for breath, and the system, once an impenetrable fortress, had taken its first crack. Blank. Blank. Truth, once released from the chest of the oppressed, never returns quietly to silence. After the confrontation in the company lobby, an incident recorded by an employee and, accidentally, circulated on the internal network, Crestfall Media could no longer turn a blind eye. That very afternoon, senior legal counsel from the parent company, Crestfall International, flew in from Chicago to the New York headquarters. No warning emails, no internal announcements. They arrived, like a winter storm crashing into a climate pretending to be spring. The meeting room on the 21st floor, usually reserved for VIP partners, opened for the first time to a formal, recorded internal investigation. Naomi and Nia were invited in, not as employees, but as key witnesses. No personal lawyers, no spokespeople, only the truth and memory burned as clearly as fire in their eyes. We don't want anyone fired. We just don't want anyone else to go through what we did, Naomi said, her voice low, gaze unblinking. If the company wants to maintain its diverse and inclusive image in the media, then it better start by believing the voices that have been silenced. Every audio file, every video clip, every Slack message, carefully categorized. Attached were scanned emails, mocking flyers, and system logs confirming Bryce, Derek, and Cole had accessed the marketing department printer. Legal said little while listening, but one among them, an Asian woman named Min, after viewing the footage of Bryce being taken down, said only one line. They were calm. That's not rage, that's restraint. The very next day, the first internal memo went out to all employees. An independent investigation into acts of racial discrimination, bias, and hostile work environment has been initiated. No more avoidance. Truth now had an address. And once truth has a place to live, others begin to speak. A Latinx female colleague, once mocked by Bryce for her accent, sent an anonymous letter recounting her experience. A gay employee revealed he'd been told to appear more masculine during client presentations. An Indian intern recalled being called the IT guy throughout his internship. Despite working in strategy, all of it sent to the investigation team. All of it pointed back to one truth. Crestfall was not as clean as its spotlight. A week later, the anonymous survey distributed by the company received over 400 responses. Most included the same line. Thank you, Naomi and Nia. Because of you, I finally had the courage to share my story. Silence no longer held at the top. Regional directors, once dismissive, were summoned. Managers, once willfully blind, were ordered to submit personal accountability reports. The company's interior felt like a building hit by an electrical surge. And the first ones to flip the light switch were the ones who rebooted the entire system. Meanwhile, the Carter sisters came to work every day. No fanfare, no drums beating, but their presence, now. It was a living reminder that justice doesn't live in policy documents. It lives in the way you walk down a hallway, and in how others finally meet your eyes with respect. In the middle of the storm, they remained steady, because they knew this was only the beginning. Blank. Blank. Thursday evening. The red brick Carter home, tucked at the end of a quiet street in suburban Brooklyn, had always been a place of safety. Here, there were no backhanded compliments, no scrutinizing glances behind professional glasses, only the trustworthy silence of the porch roof, the warmth of the kitchen, and the eyes of a father. But tonight, the air was different. Samuel Carter stood in the kitchen, preparing dinner. Nia washed vegetables while Naomi silently scrolled through company emails. On her screen, the latest announcement from the parent company. Immediate suspension of all mid-level management at the New York branch pending investigation. A victory on paper, but it came with a chill. Naomi knew. Those stripped of power rarely went quietly. At 7:34 p.m., the sound of tires hitting the curb echoed outside. Not the sound of a normal car. A sharp, heavy brake, deliberate and aggressive. Samuel looked up from the stove. Naomi froze. Nia pulled her hands from the sink, drying them quickly. Through the kitchen window, they saw a black SUV parked crooked across the driveway, no plates. 3 men stepped out. Leading them was Greg Holloway, broad-shouldered, in a dark leather jacket, unmistakably the father of Derek, the man Nia had taken down in the company lobby. The door hadn't been knocked. Samuel was already there, swinging it open with calm finality. "We don't entertain uninvited guests," he said, voice low, but strong enough to halt the storm outside. Greg growled, "You teach your kids to ruin lives with a few edited clips? My son lost his job. His name's in the dirt. And your girls? Treated like heroes?" Samuel didn't respond right away. He stepped onto the porch, blocking the doorway with his body. "I taught my daughters not to bow to deceit. And if that hurts you, maybe you should have taught your son better." One of the men behind Greg stepped forward, ready to climb the steps. Samuel raised his hand, palm open. No fists, no shove, just a stance so firm. No one dared take another step. Greg shouted, "You think your family's black belt crap means something out here? This is real life, not a kung fu movie." Naomi and Nia appeared behind their father. They said nothing, but their eyes, sharp like reinforced glass, reflected every ounce of aggression standing before them. "It's not martial arts that got us here," Naomi said. "It's true, and the only reason you're standing here is because you've failed to face it." Greg lost control, charging up the steps like a bull. But he never made it to the third one. Samuel sidestepped, rotated his body, and, with a single precise motion, redirected Greg's shoulder joint, dropping him to the wooden porch like a sack of grain. No brute force, just cold, perfect technique. Another man reached into his coat, but Naomi was already there. She locked his wrist, twisted hard, and pulled out a folding knife. The metallic clatter of the blade echoed across the porch. Silence followed. Samuel stared down at Greg, now gasping on the ground. "I won't call the police. But if you come back, the law will be the least of your problems." The men stumbled back, not daring to look behind. The SUV peeled off, spitting gravel and rage left unspent. As the door shut behind them, Nia exhaled deeply. Naomi tightened her grip on the doorknob. Samuel walked slowly back to the kitchen. But before turning to his simmering pot, he said, "When violence knocks, open the door. But don't let it inside. Make sure it knows it has no right to stay." The house fell into silence once more. But this time, not from fear, because the storm had passed, and they were still standing. Blank. 3 weeks later, when Naomi and Nia walked through the revolving doors of Crestfall Media's headquarters. The space looked just the same, Polished marble floors. Sunlight pouring from the glass ceiling. A receptionist smiling out of habit. But one thing was no longer the same. They no longer walked in like people trying to belong. They walked in like women who had reclaimed their rightful place. In those 3 weeks, the internal investigation had concluded. The results? Bryce. Terminated, with no right to reinstatement. Derek and Cole. Brought before the legal board. Permanently barred from the media industry. The former HR director. Replaced. A new code of conduct. Implemented. With a dedicated chapter titled, Anti-Silencing Policy. Co-authored by Naomi herself. The grand lobby was crowded that day. But this time, no one was secretly recording. Instead, every eye turned toward them, not with fear or judgment, but with respect. A shy, brown-skinned intern stepped up. He held out a folded piece of paper. Handwritten. Thank you. Because of you, I didn't give up. Naomi smiled. She didn't reply. Because sometimes, the reason we rise needs no explanation. That afternoon, in the 15th floor auditorium, Crestfall hosted its first all-company town hall, with the international board in attendance. Was the speaker invited to open the event? Naomi Carter. She walked to the podium. The spotlight wasn't harsh, just enough for everyone to see the eyes of someone who had walked through darkness. Her voice wasn't loud, wasn't shaky, wasn't grandiose. It was clear and real. I used to believe that if I just did well, I'd be accepted. But the truth is, you can't ask a door to open if you're not brave enough to knock, even when you know no one might answer. She paused, looked around the hall, now silent as a breath. I'm not here to tell a sob story. I'm here to say this. When you speak up, you're never just speaking for yourself. You speak for the one isolated at the edge of their desk. For the one who goes by nicknames instead of their real name. For the one crying silently in the bathroom for being too sensitive. And for the version of yourself who once thought staying silent was the only way to survive. Asterisk. She stepped back half a pace. Beside her, Nia joined. No introduction needed. We fought, Nia said, but if we stopped there, it wouldn't be enough. We came back, so that everyone who's ever been afraid can step into the light. And so that everyone in this room can never pretend not to see, ever again. Asterisk. The entire auditorium rose to its feet. Not because they had to, but because they couldn't not. That day, Naomi and Nia returned to their old desks. The desks had been cleaned. And behind them, a new photograph hung on the wall. 2 women standing tall in the company lobby. Light from above was casting down like a beam of unveiled hope. Beneath the photo, a small inscription, written by the new CEO. They stood, so others could stand too. Their fight hadn't disappeared, but it had changed form. From resistance, into reformation. From reaction, into rebirth. They hadn't just reclaimed their voice. They had taught an entire system how to truly listen. Blank. Underscore. Blank. This story isn't just about 2 women of color. It's not just about martial arts, surveillance footage, or internal investigations. It's about the silence we've grown used to enduring. And about the choice that we can stand up, even when the first steps are taken alone. Have you ever been dismissed? Labeled because of your skin color, your gender, or the way you speak out? Tell your story, because maybe you're the one someone's been waiting for to find their courage. Pushpin call to action. Speech balloon. Share your story in the comments below. Loudspeaker tag someone who needs to hear this today. Check mark. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for more real, powerful, and moving stories like this. Because silence has never been the answer. And justice always begins with one person brave enough to speak.